Actually, the three things they do is they're unreasonable, they're disproportionate, and they're unfair.
They have to be seen to be doing.
And we need to use that back on them. The simplest question we've got is what a 2-year-old comes out with. Why? So when the regulator says, and I'm using the word regulator because we're talking about the UK as the Nursing Midwifery Council. Australia has a regulator. It doesn't seem to jump in as often. And New Zealand has a regulator separate for nursing and separate for midwifery. Not too familiar with Canada, America. I think each state in America has different regulation and there's inconsistencies. But if I know the UK one, compared to the General Medical Council and the Dental Council and other regulatory bodies, when somebody is brought before them, they sanction maybe 1%. Don't quote me exactly, but say it's 1%, compared to 33% on the Nursing Midwifery Register. So if your name just comes before them, there's a third of a chance you'll get some kind of sanction. And I've seen this even in the last few weeks, even when there's nothing wrong with the midwife's practice. But they ask for a statement, they get a 20-page statement saying, what a kind, good, effective midwife, I've done all this training and all these things, and they look and find something. Now, in a legal scenario, you would not have that. You just have, where's the evidence? I'll answer that question and that question. You don't have any evidence for that question. In civil cases, it's the balance of probability, which is like 51-ish% or so. Criminal, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, which is like 95 to 100%. But that isn't the thing. The court is actually a civil court with the same balance of probability that the NMC should be using. But because they're using such a fear-based practice, they're to protect the public. But as we can see with IM UK, the independent midwives in the UK have been stopped from doing intrapartum care because of lack of appropriate insurance as deemed by the regulator, and the regulator cannot and will not say what the appropriate insurance is. It's actually not their job to say what it is. It's between the registrant and their insurers to have indemnity insurance. But it's still the civil burden of proof, but it's just misinterpreted by a regulator who's over-regulating with the aim to make birth safe for the public. They've made it unsafe because women will have unassisted births and hemorrhage at home and their babies might die. That leads me back to the criminal point of manslaughter. It's 1957, the Bolam test. I think that was the anaesthetist test. Some anaesthetists got it clinically wrong. And generally, there was another test called the Bolitho test that followed on and added to that. And this was the law up until 2015 Montgomery. Montgomery hasn't replaced the reasonable standard of care. So if you did something unusual or different, let's say you didn't cut and clamp the cord straight away, and that was different practice from everyone else, so long as you could show that there was at least one other practitioner or a group of practitioners that would have done the same as you, it was considered reasonable. The only problem with that, as found in Montgomery, was it could be patronising. So you would have a clinician saying, well, I've always done it that way, and my friends do it that way. Yeah, the rest of the world and the scientific research community don't agree with us. We always did it like this, so it's reasonable. So there was a bit of an argument that it is reasonable. It's better since 2015 because it's not up to us to make the decision. That's why I'm saying it's patronising. It's up to the woman. And the woman can only make a reasonably informed decision of consent or refusal if she knows about the risks. So before, I might say, well, I'm just going to break your waters, just do it. Well, I'm going to break your waters, it'll speed the labour up. She says, is there anything bad that can happen? No, not really. You know, I didn't explain any risks, I didn't document anything. And that was okay up until it wasn't okay, but the law let it slide. But no longer because of 2015 Montgomery. In a workshop, if I do a longer session, I will get people printing out court forms and we will go to websites on cases. Catherine mentioned a case, it was 2012, I think, Julia Duthie, that was in the High Court. So there's a few brave souls that go to the High Court because the only way to challenge the regulator in the UK, if they make a decision, is to go to the High Court. You can, however, challenge them in the county court just for anything that you don't like about their practice. So if they've over-regulated or taking away a woman's human rights to give birth at home because there's no midwife now to facilitate that woman's birth. And this is very similar to the case in Hungary of Agnes Garab, who that case went to the European Court of Human Rights, taken there by a mother, because she was unable to have a home birth because they're arresting the midwife. And other countries have the fear and threat of arrest. And it's shocking, it happened in England in the last few weeks, that an ambulance and a police car were sent to the home of a woman. So the police car went to arrest the midwife because somebody had phoned up and said there's an independent midwife practicing without insurance, and she's in that house, and that woman's in labour. So the police thought, we have to go with this. This is England. I'm not talking about Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, Russia. And this was a few weeks ago. And this is as a direct consequence of the ill-informed decision by the regulator. They take advice from legal people, and they're following the letter of the law instead of the spirit of the law about protecting the public. So in this country, we had the police prepared to arrest the midwife. She, in fact, wasn't at the house. The woman was not in labour. She went into labour the next week, and the midwife was appropriately insured that cared for her. But the fact that people are even thinking that way, and going back some years, I've known of even GPs and others threatening to send a police car to a woman having a home birth because they considered that just simply home birth for a primip. A primip is an unproven pelvis, that the woman, could have a baby taken away. And I think in America, I don't even want you to look at the website, but I tell you, Sisters in Chains is full of midwives and people arrested for providing home birth, and then the families often having the babies taken by social workers because they put them to such a risk at birth, they probably put them to risk during their life. And that goes on in different states in America. I didn't feel this is a conversation, although I've just talked, it didn't feel like I was talking at you, I felt like I was sharing with you. So I might go into a room and explain something to a woman, but I could be, well, if you do that, your baby will die. Or I can be, how are you feeling? What would you like to do? Why would you like to do it that way? Okay, what do you think will happen if we do that and then we don't get the result that you want? Well, I'll see what happens then. Okay, so we're negotiating, we're working through it in a relationship of respect. I'm very passionate about respecting the midwife, because otherwise there's nobody to look after the women. As we're finding at the moment, some of the women are giving birth on their own at home without their independent midwife. How much more risky is that? And we all know the stories about they've been previously traumatised, they don't want to go into the NHS. The NHS, however kind and benevolent and wonderful people that are there, sometimes cannot accommodate the woman's wishes. Sometimes to the point of seeking legal clarification by getting a court order for a forced caesarean, which I must say is fortunately so rare in the UK, and yet a few miles away in Ireland it was so dominant up until the last case where the judges said no, we're not going to allow the hospital to do a caesarean. Up until this year, Ireland have been having many forced caesareans, and that's because the hospital is seeking clarification so that the woman won't sue them later, and they go so far the other side that they make her have, take a case, a woman who's been raped, she's got an infection, she's got all sorts of problems, and she doesn't want to have a caesarean for all sorts of complex social reasons, and none of that's regarded. It's totally the rights of the child overwhelm the mothers, which, as we know, UK law, there are no rights of a baby until it's born. And just finishing on the criminal side of things, manslaughter. When a baby has died in England, a midwife has been interviewed by the police to see if she did anything gross, recklessly negligent. But generally the police and the threshold in the UK with the Crown Prosecution Service is much more reasonable than it has been in Australia. Again, a Commonwealth country, imagine it to be similar. It's very different from here. It's very different from New Zealand. And in Germany at the moment, there is Anna, who a midwife got sentenced to 6 years and 9 months in Berlin for manslaughter. The case was of a baby that was breech. They came from another country, Russia, I think, stayed at the hotel near to the midwife, didn't get to the birth centre, was in labour, phoned her up. They all knew it was breech, they knew the risks, and the midwife attended, and the baby's heartbeat was good up until the birth, and then the baby was born flat and lifeless and white, attempted resuscitation which failed, and the parents initially were happy with their care by the midwife. The midwife has about 30 years experience. I believe she's also an obstetrician, something she shares in common with Agnes Garab of Hungary. They're both obstetrician midwives. And she was arrested. She was put in jail so she could not collude with witnesses. And then finally she was sentenced. And her expert witnesses were not allowed to present information. Again, similar to Agnes Garab, you have the medical model presenting all the risks and dangers of hippie people that want to have home births. And you don't have anybody able to present the good evidence of how home birth can actually be safer than intervention. So Anna Rockall-Lowenhoff is in jail now in Berlin, and you can all send cards to her if you like. The appeal is happening and will continue, and the best basis for her appeal will be the lack of a fair trial and process because of lack of hearing her expert witnesses. I'm a third-hand person. I have some detail, but I don't know all the details. The similar kind of appeals happening for Agnes Garab. In fact, she exhausted all her appeals, and she was then left with the last stage of amnesty by the president. And I think she's being successful at that stage at the moment.
So how many years has it taken Agnes to get to that?
With Agnes Garab, I'm guessing 4, 5, 6 years, of which she's already been in house detention. To the point that Agnes said when she went out, she was allowed out from her house detention. She saw something in a shop she wanted to buy on the day she was allowed out. And she came home and she asked somebody, I've seen something in the shop, can you go and buy it for me? And they said, why didn't you buy it? And she had lost her autonomy. She'd forgotten she had the ability just to buy something from the shop.
You don't practice again though, would you?
You wouldn't practice again after that?
You couldn't practice again, because when you're under that scrutiny and you've been criticised to the nth degree, it actually changes your whole being. You lose confidence in your own ability.
It's a beautiful concept you're talking about. There's an analogy of Schrodinger's cat. If you put a cat in a cardboard box, seal it, well not seal it, let it breathe. How does it behave? We don't know. You want to observe it. As soon as you observe it, you change its behaviour. The same as a woman in labour. If we stand there looking at her, her body behaves differently. When you have a midwife, and I know some at the moment having 4, 5, 6 investigations, their practice, they're very courageous. I hope some of them have not changed their practice. But it almost becomes impossible, so what will they do? They will leave, quite probably, and it happens all the time. What I like to see, and what I'm going to be about, is action. I think it's a bit of a guy thing, that the women's strength is their emotions, their capacity to love and not be hindered. Men are more awkward about demonstrating love and communicating. But when we're angry, we just go, right, action. Now for some of us, my action, instead of punching someone, is to write something down on a court form, take them to court, and then that's equalised the power balance. You've got people not speaking to you here, and you might even start to play the game, a negative game, of demonising them. I hate them, they're bad. When actually, when you can get an equal playing field and be listened to, and ask them a question and sit quietly, and you don't really ask them the question, you ask it through the third party, probably the judge, but I'm a fan of mediation. So if you can get another party to engage in mediation, we've got this conversation on an equal playing field. But when you go before a judge and say, these are my questions, there's a wonderful process called disclosure. You ask for information, they don't give it to you. You file a court thing, you ask for information, they have to give it to the court. So it's a brilliant process that you can then drop the court case and you've got the information you wanted. And even before you get that far, you can fill in a court form as a draft. Don't file it, don't pay anything, don't take any risk. Send it to the opponent, to the hospital or the regulator or whoever it is, and you may start to get some engagement. You may not, but you've got nothing to lose by filling in this draft. Culture is a big word because we've got bullying culture. And people don't know why they do it, and good midwives become bad managers, and this is a common trait. So how and why does that culture happen? If we've got the capacity for negativity in us to say, oh, it's bad and I hate them, we've got the possibility to change to positive language. Same as a woman who's fearful of birth can change to a positive thing through hypnobirthing. We can almost hypnobirth ourselves as individuals, whether we're midwives or doulas, to use positive language so that when we go into the situation, oh, she cannot eat, there's a negative. Cannot. Okay, she can eat if she wants, it's up to her, it's her body. Oh no, at this hospital we don't do that. If she does, she's got to have ranitidine every 2 hours. Only if she chooses to. And if we've got this instilled positive knowledge about rights and the way we approach people, we don't have to follow any guideline. We don't have to do anything. The woman can do whatever she likes and we support her with it. And we do that with our body language. And if we're like, you know, we're undermining her. So I think, you know, we get on board with the woman and we see her flourish just like anybody that we convey positivity to.